Human rescues two little alien girls. Next day, their mother arrives with a strange reward. Noah Vane left the Trayport offices later than usual. The Manifest archive was quiet at night. Rows of screens dimmed, clerks gone, only the soft hum of servers keeping the place alive. He had been reviewing cargo intake records longer than planned, double-checking flag shipments that would otherwise sit unclaimed for weeks. It was tedious work, but it kept him employed and, more importantly, kept him invisible. After leaving the Federation military 8 years ago, once a scout posted to border sectors, he wanted nothing more than stability. A desk, a quiet apartment, and a routine no one questioned. His boots clicked on the damp walkway as he crossed the lower platforms of Zereth Prime. Neon towers loomed high above, their light distorted by mist drifting from exhaust vents. He adjusted his collar against the cold, his mind half on the day's work, half on a meal he would reheat when he reached his unit. That's when he noticed them. Two children, crouched close to the base of a heat vent. They were motionless except for a faint trembling that made their ceremonial wraps quiver against their small frames. At first, Noah thought they were mannequins discarded from a market stall. Too still, too thin. But then one shifted, pulling the other closer, and he saw eyes reflecting the faint neon glow. He stopped in place. The rest of the crowd flowed past without even glancing. Noah crouched, resting his forearms on his knees, trying not to startle them. He recognized their features immediately: Arenialan hybrids. Pale violet skin with faint streaks of bioluminescent markings. Their kind had been pushed to the margins since the collapse, often abandoned when families couldn't provide for them. He had seen children like them before in outlying sectors, but never this close to the central arcology. The older girl's gaze locked on him, unblinking, sharp for her age. Her arms wrapped around the younger, shielding her from the draft. "My name's Noah," he said, voice calm, steady. He kept his hands in sight, fingers loose. His years as a scout had taught him how quickly fear could turn into panic. "Are you hurt?" The girl's lip trembled before she answered. "She's cold." She tilted her head toward the smaller child. "I'm sorry, She's Renai." The younger one tried to sit straighter, but her head lolled against her sister's shoulder. Her feet were bare, skin raw from the grated floor. She whispered, barely audible, "Toes burn." Noah's stomach tightened. He had seen frostbite before. He knew how fast exposure could cripple. He made the decision in a single breath. "I have heat in my home. Food, too." He extended one hand slightly, not to grab, but to show the choice was theirs. "You can come with me, or I can stay here with you until we figure something else out. But it's warmer inside." Sorry stared at him, weighing the risk. Her small chin lifted, defiant. "You first," she said, testing whether he would turn his back. Noah stood and took 2 steps away from them, giving them space. He turned his shoulder, showing the open street, the way out. No trap, no force, just a man waiting. Sorry pressed her lips together, then nodded once. "Pick her up," she ordered, as if she were the one giving the mission. He crouched again, wrapping his jacket around both children. Renai was frighteningly light when he lifted her into his arms. Sorry clung to the jacket's edge, holding it shut as she walked beside him, steps quick to keep pace with his longer stride. They moved through the mist-choked street. Security drones drifted past, indifferent. Noah kept his face neutral, shoulders squared. The military in him hadn't left. Eyes scanning corners, ears tracking footsteps behind them. But tonight, his mission wasn't reconnaissance or survival. It was carrying 2 children across a city that didn't care whether they lived until morning. When they reached his building, he keyed open the security door with his thumb. Inside, the hall lights buzzed cold and white. His unit door opened with a low click. The moment they stepped in, heat from the wall unit washed across them. The apartment was spare: small couch, compact kitchen, narrow table, shelves lined with folded clothes. A man's home, practical and sterile. Noah set Renai gently on the couch, then helped Soriai climb beside her. He crouched again, speaking levelly. "This is my place. You're safe here tonight." The girls glanced around like they didn't believe him. Their shoulders stayed tense, ready to run. He moved slowly, pulling a clean blanket from the shelf and spreading it across their laps. Then he crossed the galley, switched on the small heater coil, and set water to boil. He talked as he worked, not to fill silence, but to keep the air steady. About broth packets, bread, some syrup if you like sweet. It's not much, but it's better than Vince. Renee's eyes flicked toward him at the word sweet. She said nothing, but her lips parted as if she remembered the taste. He turned back, kneeling again. Feet first, he said. We clean them, wrap them, then socks. Sorry-Eye hesitated, then lifted one foot onto his knee. The skin was cracked, bleeding in places. Noah warmed the cloth in his hands before touching her. He worked carefully, explaining each step. Warm cloth, then ointment, then bandage, then sock. His tone was even, almost professional. It was the same tone he'd once used guiding recruits across rough terrain. Renee watched with wide eyes. Purple socks, she whispered. Noah looked up. Purple. She nodded seriously. Because purple is brave. Something in him cracked then. Not pity, but a recognition of how children invent strength when no one gives it to them. He gave her the purple pair. When both girls were settled, he served broth in steaming cups and slices of bread with syrup. He sat across from them, eating the same meal, not separating himself. Sorry-Eye broke the silence first. You didn't ask where we came from. I asked if you needed help, Noah said. That was enough for now. Renee licked syrup from her fingers, hesitant, then whispered, Will we have to leave in the morning? Noah looked at both of them, then at the closed door. His voice was steady, final. No, not tomorrow. The girls exchanged a glance. For the first time, Sorry-Eye's rigid shoulders eased. Renee pulled the blanket up to her chin. Noah leaned back in his chair, arms folded, keeping watch. He knew the rules of this city. He knew what neighbors might think if they saw two hybrid children in his home. But tonight wasn't about rules. Tonight was about a decision. Two girls were alive because he stopped walking. And when Sorry-Eye whispered before sleep, Our mother will come, he nodded once. Then I'll open the door. He stayed awake long after they slept, listening to their breathing against the soft hum of the heater, and for the first time in years, he felt a mission that mattered. The knock came just as the girls began to stir, soft and deliberate, nothing like the pounding of patrols or the careless thud of neighbors. Noah was already half awake in the chair by the door, his body trained by years of military discipline to rest lightly. He stood in silence, eyes flicking toward the alcove where Sorry-Eye sat up instantly, alert, protective hand on her sister's shoulder. Renee mumbled something and rubbed her eyes, but stayed curled under the blanket. When Noah opened the door, the woman kneeling in the hall did not look like someone begging. Her posture was controlled, even if her hands trembled. Pale violet skin, streaked with faint bioluminescence that shimmered under the corridor lights, gave her away instantly as the children's mother. Her long black hair hung damp against her shoulders, framing a face marked by exhaustion more than age. She wore the same ceremonial wrap as her daughters, but hers was torn and stained, clinging in places that revealed more than it covered. My daughters, she said, voice low but firm. Her eyes darted past Noah to the warmth inside. When she saw them on the couch, her expression cracked. Relief first, then shame. She bowed her head quickly, forcing control back. I can pay. Noah didn't hesitate. Come inside. She lifted her eyes at him, startled, as though she expected questions first. When she stepped over the threshold, she kept her movements tight, as if bracing for rejection. The girls bolted toward her, clinging to her sides. She knelt, pressing both of them against her, whispering something in their shared tongue, words too quick and soft for Noah to follow. He closed the door quietly and stood by it, arms crossed, watching without intruding. The woman drew a deep, steadying breath before speaking again. I'm Naris, she said, still crouched with her children. Her gaze flicked to Noah, sharp but wary. I know what you did. Taking them in, giving them food. Men don't do this without wanting something in return. I can give you what you want. She touched the torn wrap at her chest, pulling it tighter, but her meaning was plain. Noah felt his jaw tighten. He had seen women in war zones offer the same thing to soldiers when their families had nothing left to barter. It wasn't surprising, but it hit harder here, in the middle of a city where people stepped over her children without slowing. I didn't bring them here for that, Noah said evenly. His voice was calm, but there was steel under it. I brought them here because they were freezing. That's all. Naris studied him, tried to read if it was a trick. Soriai shifted closer to him, as if testing the space between her mother's offer and his answer. Renai, too young to weigh it, only clung tighter to her mother's arm. Naris lowered her eyes, shoulders sagging slightly. We've been here 3 weeks. No shelter. The girls had food only when I could find trade. They grew weaker every day. I thought. She stopped, gathering herself, then straightened. I thought if someone finally stopped, it wouldn't be for kindness. Noah stepped toward the kitchenette, filling the silence with action. He set the kettle on again, laid out bread, eggs, and a jar of pickled greens. The ordinary rhythm of preparing breakfast steadied the room. Sit, he said, gesturing to the table. Eat first. Talk after. Naris hesitated, then obeyed. She guided the girls to chairs, and only when they were settled did she take one herself. She watched Noah move around the small kitchen, her suspicions slowly competing with hunger. When he placed plates before them, Renai immediately dipped bread into syrup, her eyes brightening with small joy. Soriai ate slower, still alert, watching both adults. You were Federation once, Naris said suddenly, her voice careful but pointed. The way you move, the way you check the corners before sitting down. A scout, maybe? Noah didn't look at her as he cracked an egg into the pan. Border scout. Long ago. Why are you here? She pressed. Work. Manifest records at the docks. It's quiet. He turned and set the pan on the table, dividing the food between plates. That's all I need now. Naris studied him. Men who leave the Federation don't usually end up pushing paper. I didn't want another war, he said flatly. She held his gaze, then looked away. The children kept eating, the tension too large for them to name. After the meal, Noah crouched again, checking Renai's bandages, replacing them with fresh wrappings. Naris watched him closely, surprised at the precision in his hands. He felt her eyes on him, but didn't comment. You cut the labels from your shirts, Soriai said suddenly, pointing at the hem of the one she wore. They scratch, Noah answered simply. Then, after a pause, and I don't like labels. Naris's expression shifted, a flicker of something softer. Maybe respect, maybe just exhaustion letting down its guard. For the first time since she entered, she spoke without bargaining. If we stay, even just for tonight, I can clean. Cook, whatever keeps the girls here. Noah shook his head. You don't owe me service. Or anything else. His tone left no space for argument. Naris blinked, caught off guard, as if no man had ever said that to her. She looked at her daughters, then back to him. Then why? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the girls wrapped in his 2 large shirts, their shoulders finally lowering as they warmed. His voice was steady when he did reply. Because someone should have stopped. I was the one who did. The room was silent for a long moment. The heater hummed. The rain on the sill ticked faintly. Naris finally exhaled, slow and heavy, and for the first time she allowed her shoulders to drop just a little. The children leaned against her, full from food, drifting toward drowsiness. Noah cleared plates, wiped the counter, and glanced at them one more time. He didn't speak the thought aloud, but it stayed firm in his chest. Tonight wasn't the end of anything. It was the start. The morning stretched into a quiet afternoon. The girls dozed on the couch under the blanket, their small breaths steady now, their skin flushed from warmth rather than cold. Noah cleaned the kitchen with practiced motions, stacking dishes, wiping the counter, putting order into a space that had never seen more than one person at a time. Naris sat at the edge of the table, hands folded in her lap, eyes tracking him as if she still couldn't decide what kind of man he was. For the audience, there were still questions from the first 2 chapters. Why had Naris been forced to the streets for 3 weeks? Where was the girl's father? Why did Noah, a man who avoided attachments since leaving the Federation, risk trouble for strangers when everyone else walked past? Chapter 3 needed to bring those answers into focus without stopping the flow. Noah finally broke the silence first. You said you've been here 3 weeks. How? His tone wasn't sharp, but it was direct, the way a soldier asked for a situation report. Neris's jaw tightened. She glanced at the girls before answering. We came from the outer district. The collapse cut supplies. People left or died. We made it this far by trade and begging. The father is gone. Left when the food ran out. Her voice stayed calm, but her hands clenched together. After that, I kept the wraps and told the girls they still meant something. But it was just cloth against the cold. Noah nodded once. No pity, just acknowledgement. He understood abandonment too well. Soldiers he had served with had disappeared into deserts, jungles, or simply left one morning and never came back. And when no one stopped, you assumed no one would, he said. Neris's eyes hardened. Kindness is not free here. If it comes with a price. I had nothing else left to pay. Her honesty cut the room. Noah looked at her for a long moment, then glanced at the girls. Then let's make this simple. I don't want payment. I don't want what you offered earlier. He kept his voice even certain. I want them safe. And you. That's all. Sorry, stirred awake at that. Eyes half open, listening. Children understood more than adults thought. She sat up and spoke with the bluntness only a child could. If we stay, will guards come? Will they take us back outside? Noah crouched to meet her gaze. Not while I'm here, he said. No hesitation. No soft promises. Just fact. That answer seemed to satisfy her more than anything her mother had said in weeks. She leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes again. Renai blinked awake too, yawning wide. She rubbed her cheek and whispered, Will there be sweet again tonight? A small smile tugged at Noah's mouth. Yes, he said. Sweet tonight. Sweet tomorrow. Neris watched the exchange, shoulders rigid. Then slowly she let out a breath she had been holding since she stepped inside. For the first time, she reached for the bread jar on her own without waiting for him to offer. That, in its own way, was a surrender. The day wore forward. Noah gave the girls clean shirts from his shelf, sleeves too long, hems brushing their knees. Renai laughed at her reflection in the window, twirling with arms flapping. Sorry inspected the seams seriously, as though she were judging the workmanship of armor. Both reactions made Noah feel the weight of the choice he had made. His unit, once sterile, now looked like it belonged to more than one person. Later, Neris rose and began to clean. She took the initiative without asking, wiping down surfaces, folding the blanket more neatly than Noah ever did, gathering the girls' wraps and hanging them by the heater rail. He almost told her she didn't have to, but the focused way she did it stopped him. She needed to contribute. She needed to prove she wasn't just taking. He let her. As evening settled, Noah reheated stew from his stores. The smell filled the small unit. Neris ladled portions into bowls, her movements efficient but careful, as if she hadn't touched a proper kitchen in months. The girls ate hungrily, Renai humming softly between bites, Sorry watching her mother with a protective edge that children shouldn't need, but carried anyway. After dinner, Noah sat back in his chair, observing the way the room felt different. He hadn't realized how quiet it used to be until laughter, real, fragile, but growing, echoed from the alcove as the girls turned the blanket into a small game of who gets the corner. Even Neris allowed a faint smile to slip. When the children settled for sleep, Noah finally asked the question that had lingered since dawn. What do you want to do now? Neris looked at him across the dim room. Her expression held both defiance and exhaustion. I want them to live, she said simply. Then softer, I want them to stop looking over their shoulders. He nodded. It was enough for now. The heater clicked, filling the silence with steady warmth. Noah leaned back, boots planted, arms folded. He didn't say it aloud, but in his mind the answer was already formed. They wouldn't just live here for a night. He wasn't letting them go back to the streets. The audience's unanswered questions had now found ground. Neris's backstory, the father's absence, Noah's reasons for opening the door. And yet, new tension had been planted. Could Neris truly trust him, or would fear of being used still haunt every gesture? That weight lingered as the lights dimmed and the city outside carried on, indifferent, while inside the apartment, a fragile beginning took shape. The next morning began not with silence, but with small noises Noah wasn't used to, footsteps on the floor, The clatter of cups moved too roughly, the muffled whisper of children arguing about who got the warmer spot under the blanket. He opened his eyes to see Renai peeking over the couch at him, her hair sticking up in all directions. When he met her gaze, she froze for a moment, then asked bluntly, "Do you always sleep in that chair?" Noah stretched his shoulders, the old stiffness of a soldier's rest clinging to his muscles. "When I'm not sure who's at my table," he said. "It's easier this way." Soriai appeared behind her sister, serious as always. "Then you don't trust us," she said, not as a complaint, but as a conclusion. Noah stood, walking past them to the small kitchen, lighting the stove. "I don't trust anyone right away," he admitted. "But I gave you the blanket and food. That's trust enough to start." Narration emerged from the alcove, still in the shirt he had given her, the fabric falling loosely over her frame. Her long hair was tangled, her movements slower than her daughter's, but her eyes were sharper than both of theirs combined. "He's right," she said quietly, laying a hand on Soriai's shoulder. "Trust takes time." The girls sat at the table while Noah laid out breakfast, bread, boiled eggs, and tea with a spoonful of syrup for Renai, who smiled shyly as she stirred it. The simple act raised another question that had been unspoken until now. How long could his stores last with 4 mouths instead of 1? Soriai asked it before Noah could. "How much food do you have?" "Enough for us." Noah looked at her, appreciating her directness. "Enough for a while," he said. "Not forever, but we'll manage. The docks aren't short on trade." His tone was steady, but in his head he calculated the reality. He would have to adjust his weekly ration pickups, maybe stretch his credit further. He didn't say it aloud. It wasn't their burden to carry yet. Narration ate slowly, watching him over the rim of her cup. She saw the way he answered the girl's question without hesitation, even if the numbers behind it weren't clean. She spoke after a pause. "You live alone. No family." Noah shook his head. "Not anymore. No wife. No children. Just me." He glanced at the girls. "Until last night." Renai grinned at that, small teeth showing. "So now you're ours?" she asked innocently, then laughed when Soriai elbowed her. Narration stiffened at the remark, but Noah only said, "For now, I'm the one making sure you don't end up back at that vent." His calm authority cut through the awkwardness. After breakfast, he gathered his work satchel. The girls froze, watching him prepare to leave. "Where are you going?" Soriai asked, already bracing for abandonment. "Work," he said. "Trade port records. I'll be gone a few hours. The unit stays locked. Don't open for anyone but me." Narration rose then, setting her cup aside. "And if someone comes?" "They won't," Noah said firmly. "But if they do, you wait. I'll handle it." He looked at the girls, then at her. "You'll be safe." The uncertainty in their faces was unmistakable, so he made a choice he hadn't made in years. He removed the old military knife from his belt, a weapon he never used but always carried, and set it on the highest shelf out of the girl's reach. "Just in case," he said, "but I'll be back." When he returned later that day, the first thing he noticed was the smell, stew simmering, vegetables and broth filling the small unit. Narration was at the stove, hair tied back with a strip of cloth, moving with quiet efficiency. The girls were at the table, drawing shapes into the condensation on the window. For the first time, the apartment didn't feel like a place of storage, but a place of living. Soriai pointed at the pot. "She cooks better than you." Narration gave her daughter a look, but Noah only nodded. "I believe that." Dinner passed with fewer silences. Renai asked questions about his work. "Do you move crates with your hands?" And he explained what an archivist did, how he logged and tracked cargo, how ships docked and unloaded. He kept it simple, but it fascinated her enough to ask if she could see one of the ships someday. Soriai remained quieter, but her sharp eyes stayed on him, still testing, still waiting to see if he was the kind of man who kept his word. When the girls fell asleep, Narration stayed at the table. She traced the rim of her cup before speaking. "They've asked me already if this is home now. What should I tell them?" Noah leaned forward, forearms on the table. "Tell them the truth. That it's safe. For as long as I can make it." Her eyes met his, a flicker of doubt in them. "And when you decide we're too much," he held her gaze, "then I'll say it to your face. But that day isn't today." Narration lowered her eyes, but the tension in her shoulders eased. She didn't thank him, not with words, but with the simple act of staying seated, not retreating to the alcove. For her, that was already a form of trust. The apartment had changed in a single day. What had once been silent now carried the weight of footsteps, voices, and the faint sound of children's breathing as they slept. And though Noah didn't speak it aloud, he knew what the audience already understood. The real challenge ahead wasn't keeping them warm or fed. It was breaking through walls built by years of disappointment and fear. That night, he sat again in the chair by the door, but when Renai stirred in her sleep and whispered, "Don't leave," he found himself answering softly, "I won't." And for the first time in years, he meant it. The next morning, Noah left early for the docks. The girls had clung to him a little tighter before he stepped out, and Neris stood behind them, her expression unreadable. He promised he would be back before evening, and when the door closed, the apartment felt strangely heavy to her, quiet, but filled with his presence in the smallest things: the folded shirts, the neat stack of ration packets, the way he'd aligned the chairs after breakfast. At the docks, Noah kept his routine sharp. He logged shipments, checked cargo tags, and confirmed manifest records with quiet precision. But the rhythm of work couldn't completely block the thought pressing at the back of his mind. Someone might notice what had changed in his home. Zerith Prime wasn't hostile to refugees, but it wasn't forgiving either. Neighbors gossiped. Vendors watched. Too many mouths in one unit meant questions, and questions meant risk. On his way back, he stopped at a vendor's kiosk to buy socks and another blanket. The woman behind the counter smirked as she bagged the items. "Didn't think you were the family type," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried the sting of curiosity sharpened into judgment. "Looks like you picked up strays." Noah's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just stared at her until her smile faded, then paid and walked away. When he reached his building, he noticed the lobby board had a fresh notice about guest registrations. Not unusual, not aimed at him, but his eyes lingered on it longer than they should have. He folded the blanket tighter under his arm and kept moving. Inside the apartment, Neris was at the sink washing dishes, her hair tied back, wearing one of his shirts that fell almost to her knees. The girls were on the floor by the heater, arranging the socks from the new bundle into neat piles. Renai looked up and smiled. "You came back. I said I would," Noah replied, setting the blanket on the couch. Sorry Eye's gaze flicked to the door. "Did anyone see you with us?" she asked bluntly. "People always see," Noah said. He crouched down, pulling one of the socks into shape. "But it doesn't mean they care." Neris dried her hands and turned. Her voice was quiet, almost resigned. "They care when it gives them something to talk about. 3 hybrids in a human's home. It's not nothing." Noah stood, his frame filling the small space. "Let them talk," he said. His voice was calm, steady, the way it had been in the field. "What happens in this room is ours." The girls exchanged a glance, reassured more by his certainty than by the words themselves. Renai scrambled to her feet and tugged the blanket out of its wrapping. "Is this for us?" "For everyone," Noah said, helping her shake it open. Together, they spread it across the couch, and Renai flopped onto it dramatically, announcing, "This is softer than the vent." Neris allowed herself a small laugh, short, genuine, unexpected. She quickly covered it by folding the rest of the socks, but Noah caught it. Dinner that night was louder. The girls giggled through most of it, fighting over who got the last piece of flatbread until Neris cut it cleanly in half with the old pocket knife. She gave each girl a piece and then passed the knife back to Noah. Their hands brushed, brief, unplanned, but both noticed. After the meal, while the children settled into their alcove, Neris lingered at the window. The arcology lights glowed across the glass, reflecting against her skin. She didn't turn when she spoke. "When I saw the notice downstairs about guests, I thought of leaving before they forced us out." Noah stepped behind her, close but not touching. "And now?" She looked down at the city, her hands gripping the frame. "Now the girls call this place safe. If I take them out again, they'll never forgive me." He watched her shoulders, the faint tremor in them. "Then don't take them out," he said simply. "If anyone asks, I'll answer." Neris turned then, slowly, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the hidden price in his promise. When she found none, she finally nodded. That night, as the heater cycled and the city's noise bled through the walls, the girls whispered their goodnights from behind the curtain. Renai's last words before drifting off were small but heavy. "If we stay, no one will forget us, right?" Noah's answer came steady, without pause. "No one forgets you here." Naris laid down later than the children, on the couch with a new blanket pulled around her. She closed her eyes to the sound of Noah moving quietly in the chair by the door, his presence like a guard post, unyielding but unspoken. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to sleep without planning an escape. The days that followed shaped themselves into a rhythm none of them expected. Morning began with the hiss of the heater, the clink of cups on the table, and the smell of broth simmering or bread warming on the pan. Noah left for the docks with his satchel, returned in the evenings with food or small supplies, and each time the girls greeted him at the door as if he'd come back from a month-long journey. Naris cleaned, cooked, and kept the girls occupied, but she never relaxed fully. She still watched him with the caution of someone who had lived too long waiting for betrayal. That night, the rain came heavier than usual, rattling the metal of the window frame. Noah had finished his reports from the day and pushed the datapad aside. The girls were already asleep in their alcove, the blankets stretched into a miniature fortress. Their soft breathing was steady, though Renai occasionally mumbled words in her sleep, half-formed and childlike. Naris sat on the floor with a basin of warm water. She untied her hair, letting it spill across her shoulders, and began rinsing out the grit. The shirt she wore, one of his was damp at the neckline, clinging to the curve of her back. She wrung the water through the strands with slow, careful motions. Noah tried to keep his focus on the paperwork still left undone, but the sound of water dripping, the sight of her bare shoulders, and the quiet intensity of her movements held him. She glanced up once and caught his eyes on her. For a moment, she didn't look away. Then, instead of retreating, she said softly, "Can you help?" She lifted the towel, her voice calm but carrying weight. It wasn't a command, nor was it timid. It was a test. Noah stood, moving closer. He took the towel from her, careful to keep his movements deliberate. He bent slightly, drying her hair in slow circles, the heat of her skin brushing his knuckles. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the unfamiliarity of being cared for without demand. "You're steady," she murmured. "Years of practice," he replied. His voice was quiet, as if he didn't want to disturb the stillness. Scouts didn't get much room for mistakes. Her shoulders rose, then eased. "You could have made me repay you already," she said. "Most men would have. And I was ready. That's what frightens me most. I was ready." Noah stopped, drying for a moment, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You don't owe me anything. Not food, not your body, nothing." She tilted her head slightly, letting the towel slip into her lap. Her hand rose and rested on his chest, palm flat, fingers spread as if to measure the beat of his heart. Her eyes searched his face with raw intensity. "If I kiss you, will you still say the same?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. She leaned up, lips brushing his soft at first, uncertain, then pressing more firmly when she felt him hold steady. He didn't pull her closer, didn't seize the moment. His hand only steadied her waist, leaving the choice with her. The kiss was brief, but it left her cheeks flushed, her breath uneven. She pulled back, searching his expression again. He met her eyes without flinching. "You don't owe me," he repeated, voice low but unshakable. For a moment she was silent. Then a small, almost disbelieving smile flickered at her lips. She whispered, "Then maybe I want to." From behind the curtain, a voice interrupted, Renai's, drowsy and blunt. "Are you married now?" Naris startled, hiding her face in her hands. A laugh slipped out anyway, muffled but genuine. Noah shook his head, lips twitching. "Not yet," he said, loud enough for the girls to hear. There was no answer, only the rustle of the blanket and Renai's muffled giggle. Sorry, older and sharper, stayed silent, but no one knew she was awake, listening, filing every word away. Naris lowered her hands, cheeks still red. They hear everything, she muttered. They're children, Noah said, his voice softer now. Children who finally feel safe enough to listen instead of surviving. The rain outside hammered the window harder, but inside the unit, the air was warmer than it had ever been. The tension between them had shifted. What had begun as a transaction offered in desperation had become something slower, heavier, alive with possibility. Naris leaned back against the couch, eyes closing, her lips still curved faintly. Noah sat in the chair again, but his body was less rigid than before. He kept watch, as he always did, but for the first time since they had entered his life, he didn't feel like a soldier guarding strangers. He felt like a man keeping watch over something he didn't want to lose. The days that followed shaped themselves into a rhythm none of them expected. Morning began with the hiss of the heater, the clink of cups on the table, and the smell of broth simmering or bread warming on the pan. Noah left for the docks with his satchel, returned in the evenings with food or small supplies, and each time the girls greeted him at the door as if he'd come back from a month-long journey. Nares cleaned, cooked, and kept the girls occupied, but she never relaxed fully. She still watched him with the caution of someone who had lived too long waiting for betrayal. That night, the rain came heavier than usual, rattling the metal of the window frame. Noah had finished his reports from the day and pushed the datapad aside. The girls were already asleep in their alcove, the blanket stretched into a miniature fortress. Their soft breathing was steady, though Renai occasionally mumbled words in her sleep, half-formed and childlike. Naris sat on the floor with a basin of warm water. She untied her hair, letting it spill across her shoulders, and began rinsing out the grit. The shirt she wore, one of his, was damp at the neckline, clinging to the curve of her back. She wrung the water through the strands with slow, careful motions. Noah tried to keep his focus on the paperwork still left undone, but the sound of water dripping, the sight of her bare shoulders, and the quiet intensity of her movements held him. She glanced up once and caught his eyes on her. For a moment, she didn't look away. Then, instead of retreating, she said softly, "Can you help?" She lifted the towel, her voice calm but carrying weight. It wasn't a command, nor was it timid. It was a test. Noah stood, moving closer. He took the towel from her, careful to keep his movements deliberate. He bent slightly, drying her hair in slow circles, the heat of her skin brushing his knuckles. Her breath caught, not from fear but from the unfamiliarity of being cared for without demand. "You're steady," she murmured. "Years of practice," he replied. His voice was quiet, as if he didn't want to disturb the stillness. Scouts didn't get much room for mistakes. Her shoulders rose, then eased. "You could have made me repay you already," she said. "Most men would have. And I was ready. That's what frightens me most. I was ready." Noah stopped, drying for a moment, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You don't owe me anything. Not food. Not your body. Nothing." She tilted her head slightly, letting the towel slip into her lap. Her hand rose and rested on his chest, palm flat, fingers spread as if to measure the beat of his heart. Her eyes searched his face with raw intensity. "If I kiss you, will you still say the same?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. She leaned up, lips brushing his, soft at first, uncertain, then pressing more firmly when she felt him hold steady. He didn't pull her closer, didn't seize the moment. His hand only steadied her waist, leaving the choice with her. The kiss was brief, but it left her cheeks flushed, her breath uneven. She pulled back, searching his expression again. He met her eyes without flinching. "You don't owe me," he repeated, voice low but unshakable. For a moment she was silent. Then a small, almost disbelieving smile flickered at her lips. She whispered, "Then maybe I want to." From behind the curtain, a voice interrupted, Renai's, drowsy and blunt. "Are you married now?" Naris startled, hiding her face in her hands. A laugh slipped out anyway, muffled but genuine. Noah shook his head, lips twitching. "Not yet," he said, loud enough for the girls to hear. There was no answer, only the rustle of the blanket and Renai's muffled giggle. Sorry, older and sharper, stayed silent, but Noah knew she was awake, listening, filing every word away. Naris lowered her hands, cheeks still red. "They hear everything," she muttered. "They're children," Noah said, his voice softer now. "Children who finally feel safe enough to listen instead of surviving." The rain outside hammered the window harder, but inside the unit, the air was warmer than it had ever been. The tension between them had shifted. What had begun as a transaction offered in desperation had become something slower, heavier, alive with possibility. Naris leaned back against the couch, eyes closing, her lips still curved faintly. Noah sat in the chair again, but his body was less rigid than before. He kept watch, as he always did, but for the first time since they had entered his life, he didn't feel like a soldier guarding strangers. He felt like a man keeping watch over something he didn't want to lose. The rain had eased by morning, leaving the air damp and metallic, the kind of smell Noah associated with ports after a storm. He returned from the docks with a bag of supplies slung over his shoulder, flatbread, dried meat, and a small jar of fruit jam Renai had begged for days earlier. The girls were at the table when he stepped in, working intently at drawing shapes on scraps of old manifest paper with a stub of charcoal. Naris was at the stove, stirring a pot of broth. For the first time since she had entered his home, she looked almost natural in the space. Yet something about her shoulders was wrong. The tension hadn't left, it had shifted. She glanced up as he set the bag down, her eyes tracing him carefully, as though preparing for a conversation she didn't want to have but couldn't avoid. After the meal, when the girls were busy building a makeshift fort with a blanket and chairs, Naris finally spoke. Her voice was low, direct, her eyes fixed on him. "If we stay here, Noah, do we belong to you?" The words hung in the air, heavier than anything she'd said before. Sorei froze inside the blanket fort, listening without revealing herself. Renai crawled closer to her sister, sensing the seriousness without understanding it. Noah sat forward, forearms on his knees. He took his time before answering, not because he was unsure, but because he knew the weight of her question. She wasn't asking about shelter or food. She was asking about ownership, about chains she had worn before and feared she might wear again, even if they were made of kindness instead of cruelty. "No," he said finally, his tone even and certain. "You don't belong to me. You belong with me." Naris blinked, her lips parting slightly, as if she hadn't expected that answer. "With you?" she repeated, testing the word. He nodded once. "This isn't a trade. Not survival in exchange for service. Not debt. You and the girls are not possessions. You're family, if you choose to be." Sorei emerged from the blanket fort slowly, her sharp eyes locked on him. "Family means no one sends us back out," she said. "That's right," Noah answered, looking at her directly. "Family means you stay." Renai tugged on her mother's sleeve, whispering with the unfiltered honesty of a child. "We can be quiet. We can be good. Please don't make us leave." Naris closed her eyes, her hand trembling as she smoothed Renai's hair. "I don't want to take you out there again," she whispered. Her voice cracked for the first time, raw and unguarded. "But I thought, if he ever changed his mind, we'd be nothing more than a burden waiting to be cast aside." Noah stood, crossing the small space between them. He crouched, so he was eye level with Naris, with Sorei hovering close and Renai clinging at her side. His voice was low but unwavering. "If the day ever comes when I can't keep you here, you'll hear from me. Not through locked doors, not through silence. To your face. Until then, this is your home." Naris looked at him, searching his expression for any sign of a hidden trap. For years, she had trained herself to find the flaw in promises, the condition waiting to appear. But his face gave her nothing except certainty. Her breath shook as she exhaled, and then, finally, her defenses slipped. She pressed forward suddenly, arms wrapping around his shoulders, her face buried against his neck. The move caught him off guard, but he didn't hesitate. His arms came up to hold her steady, anchoring her like he had anchored lost men under fire long ago. The girls crowded in too, Sorei at his side, Renai climbing into his lap, all of them pressing together in a tangle of limbs and hair and whispered breaths. For a long time, none of them spoke. When Naris finally pulled back, her cheeks were wet, but her eyes were steady. Say it again, she whispered. You belong with me, Noah said, clear and final. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, fragile but real. The girls clung tighter, as if the words themselves were a wall against the world outside. That night, after the children had drifted to sleep in their blanket fort, Neris stayed awake. She sat at the table, watching Noah as he checked the locks and dimmed the lights. When he finally sat down in his chair by the door, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. I didn't think anyone like you existed anymore. He met her gaze across the dim room. Then you were wrong. For the first time since stepping into his apartment, she didn't sleep like a guest. She slept like she was home. Morning broke with thin light filtering through the slats of the window. The city outside was already alive, vendors setting up stalls, cargo trams humming on overhead tracks, the distant whine of security drones. Inside the apartment, the air was warm, filled with the smell of tea leaves steeping and bread warming on the pan. For once, the sounds were ordinary, not edged with tension. Noah sat at the table, sipping tea, while the girls finished their breakfast. Renai dipped her bread into jam and grinned when the syrup stuck to her fingers. Sorii scolded her quietly, then stole a bite when Renai wasn't looking. Neris moved between them, adjusting cups, tidying crumbs, her long hair tied back with a strip of cloth. She no longer hovered at the edges of the room. She was part of it. But even in this comfort, an unspoken question hung in the air. Would this last? Would the city, with its indifferent laws and suspicious neighbors, eventually break apart the fragile life they had built? Noah set his cup down and looked at them all. We're going out today, he said. Neris froze for a moment, her hand stilling over the table. Out. To the registry, he clarified. We put our names down as one household. 4 of us. It's the only way to keep questions from getting louder. The girls looked at each other. Renai whispered, Does that mean we're real now? Yes, Noah said. It means you're not just staying here by chance. It means this is official. Neris studied him carefully, searching for hesitation. She found none. Slowly, she nodded. Then we'll go. The walk to the civic terminal was uneventful, but Neris's hand stayed wrapped around Renai's while Sorii kept close to Noah's side, her sharp eyes scanning every passerby. The city was its usual blur of neon and rust. Markets buzzing, lifts clanking, voices blending into the background hum. No one stopped them, but Neris's grip only tightened the closer they came to the terminal. Inside, the clerk barely looked up as he tapped on his console. Household registration. Names and ages. His voice was flat, routine. Noah spoke clearly. Noah Vane, 38. He glanced at Neris. She lifted her chin, voice steady. Neris, 31. Sorii stepped forward on her own, proud, unafraid. Sorii, 7. Renai giggled nervously, then squeaked. Renai, 5. The clerk typed without expression. 4 residents. 1 unit. He slid the panel toward them. Confirm. Renai looked at Noah, wide-eyed. Can I press it? He nodded. She reached up with both hands and tapped the confirm square. The console chimed softly, and the record was sealed. For the first time, their names were bound together, not by chance, not by survival, but by choice. On the way back, Renai skipped between them, chanting, We're real, while Sorii walked silently, but with her head held higher than before. Back in the apartment, everything looked the same, the couch, the heater, the shelves, but it felt different. 2 small toothbrushes stood in a cup by the sink. A second blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the couch. The alcove by the heater was no longer a makeshift shelter. It was a bedroom. Noah reached into his satchel and placed 4 small metal tags on the table. Each was engraved with a name and their unit number. He pushed them forward without ceremony. For the door, for the lockers, for anywhere you need to prove you belong. Sorii picked hers up first, turning it over with reverence. Renai squealed, clutching hers in both hands. Neris touched hers slowly, her thumb brushing across her name as though she didn't believe it could be permanent. That evening, dinner was more than a meal. It was a celebration. Neris prepared stew rich with vegetables Noah had bartered for, and Renai demanded the jam again. Sorii spoke more than usual, asking Noah about ships at the docks and how long he had been alone before they arrived. He answered every question, steady and patient. When the girls finally collapsed into their alcove, tangled in the blanket, Noah and Naris lingered in the kitchen. She stood at the counter, drying a cup, her back to him. "They'll remember today," she said quietly. "Not the vent, not the cold. Today." He stepped behind her, placing his hands lightly on her waist. "Good," he said. "That's what I wanted." She leaned back against him, letting his chest take her weight. For the first time, she didn't look guarded, didn't look ready to retreat. She turned, tilting her face up, and kissed him, slowly, fully, without hesitation. His hand rose to the back of her neck, steadying her as their lips pressed together. It wasn't a bargain, wasn't an act of desperation. It was choice, clear and certain. When they broke apart, Naris rested her forehead against his. Her voice was almost a whisper. "We're home, aren't we?" "We are," Noah said. They checked on the girls before bed. Sorei sprawled like a little guardian, Renai curled tight with her metal tag clutched in her fist. Naris smiled faintly, and Noah pulled the blanket higher over them both. At the window, they stood side by side, looking out at the arcology lights. The mist curled around the towers, the city indifferent as ever. But in this room, the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with breathing, with warmth, with the weight of belonging. Naris reached for his hand and held it. He didn't let go. For the first time in years, none of them had to wonder where they would sleep tomorrow. The future wasn't a question anymore. It was decided, and it was theirs.